Welcome to our Ingram Micro Meraki Voyage series. We are focusing on our Meraki dashboard demo today. I'm Dan Stewart, an engineer in our Ingram Micro Business Transformation Center. And with me today, I have Kevin Wills and Bobby Young, who focus on Meraki at our Ingram Micro offices. Welcome back, guys.
Yeah. Hey, everybody.
All right, so today we are going to share a screen and off we go. All right. So in our demo days, following our solutions overviews where we talk about the Meraki products, look at it from a high level, and then we get to the good stuff, which is actually showing it off and making it, be applicable to why we promote cloud, why we promote the Meraki dashboard, because, seeing is believing, and we want to make sure that everything the product can deliver on a data sheet is resolved properly when you actually go and maintain and manage it in a dashboard, because that's how you run a Meraki environment. It's all done through a browser, cloud managed dashboard, and that's what you see in front of you here. Now today, we're going to do things a little bit different. Usually we would go through and kind of give you a walk through the dashboard if you haven't seen it before and do, kind of the explanation of what makes Meraki unique and seeing all the products and components kind of working together. But our conversation yesterday was more about the introduction of the Catalyst portfolio infiltrating into the Meraki from a switching standpoint and the monitoring capability. And that's something that I think would be beneficial if we walk through that today and show how we can take a Catalyst product, namely a set of switches, and put it through its paces to get that onboarded into our Meraki dashboard so we can exactly do what we talked about of monitoring a non-Meraki product, in this case, Cisco Catalyst, which is supported today, switches into our Meraki environment and utilize the value of that Cisco with Cisco type approach as we continue to see a healthy migration into more cloud first or cloud centric deployments. So with that, let's set ourselves up for how we can onboard a Catalyst switch in monitoring capabilities. So first thing we're going to do is go to the network-wide view, and simply enough, we want to add devices. Most times, we want to add a Meraki device because we bought a Meraki hardware, we bought a Meraki license. We're going to add that to our portfolio and, put it into our organization and move things along that way. However, with the announcement at Cisco Live 2022, we can now add, as it says here, Catalyst switches to our dashboard. And enticingly enough, we have this click here button, and I'll see what happens. So here is really the place where we would get our journey started to do exactly what it says here. Catalyst switches on Meraki dashboard, and right now in monitor only capabilities. It talks a little bit about what we're going to do and how we get there, and we have an onboarding guide we'll go through in a minute. I have it open up in a second tab right now, and we have the onboarding app download link. So what's going to be necessary is we have to download a Meraki and Catalyst application, an actual file we can run on our desktops that will be able to connect our environments that are locally managed with Catalyst into our cloud platform of Meraki. For our purposes, I am on a Windows-based PC. I would download for Windows about a 95 meg file, and I would have the ordering guide, or sorry, the onboarding guide available here as well. So for our purposes and just timeliness, I have downloaded already the Catalyst Onboarder latest. That was today. Took only a few seconds, and it's about 97 megs of a file. Not too big from there. Now, before we do click into that and see what it does for us, it's always helpful to read the documentation first to know what we're getting into and why we're going to go about this journey. First thing you really want to know is which switches will be supported in this environment. And it is going to be only Catalyst 9000 series switches of the non-chassis variety. So 92s, 3s, and 5s in this design today. There's a full supported list if you want to see every model, every port density, every variation of these model families, because there's a lot of switches within these portfolios, and this link will tell you all about that. We do have to be on a later software release. This is something that we had to do in our environment, was update our infrastructure to support these versions that are within the 17.3 to 17.8 option, that allow these catalyst switches to be seen and monitored by the Meraki dashboard. So first thing in your journey, if you do not have a catalyst switch on one of these later releases, we're going to have to go ahead and do that for your environment, which we've already done that ourselves. We did 17.6.3 because that's right now labeled as the Cisco recommended release as of September 2022, and we're going to run that for our environment across the board. Going forward, an active DNA Essentials or DNA Advantage license is going to be required to have these switches linked properly and compliantly into our environment. Right now, they're being a little, I don't say lax, but a little loose with the necessity of clamping down on these licenses being available in your smart account or active showing in your switches. So you do have a little bit of a grace period here to test this out, test the monitoring for a little while until Cisco really comes down and says, hey, we have to double check, we have to look at your switch to make sure you are compliant. And our messaging would always be to look at DNA Advantage as the licensing recommended, and we'll show why in a little bit here. But from a sales side of the house, this is a reason why we can look to help our customers choose to renew their DNA subscriptions where they're maybe not applying them to a DNA Center appliance. They're not seeing the value of that subscription they were mandatory required to purchase with their Catalyst switches. Now we have an option to say, hey, Mr. Customer, as we go through this exercise, we can see some value of this DNA licensing of your Catalyst switch if you link it to your Meraki dashboard and see this for what it is. And this might be a good conversation starter if they're on the fence with DNA Center or need some education on that, or maybe they have a Meraki and Catalyst hybrid environment, but don't know that this DNA can be applied in this way. This is a good sales recurring revenue mechanism. Once we go through those couple checklists, you have to kind of go through the pre-onboarding. Maybe we've kind of covered this, across the board. We'll show this in more real time. The text is boring. We'll show you how this all works. But one thing that gets down to in the blue is important for those setting up their switches. You can't just take a switch and depending on what configuration you have and just lump it into Meraki's environment. There's some staging you have to do with that environment. And to do that, let me go back to my environment here. I will reconnect here, restart session. There we go. So I have a 9300 series switch. I shall blow it up. Big text here, show version. So we can see our version is 17.6.3. That's in the tolerance, right? We can do a couple things that are necessary. That's interesting. Section AAA. So AAA, by default, the AAA new model structure is not active in a newly unboxed Catalyst switch. And depending on your deployments, a lot of times you're managing these switches either with local credentials on the device or it's not connected in a AAA fashion. But one of the requirements is to make sure that new AAA model is enabled on your Catalyst switch. Really one of the first steps that we had to do because our environment as defaults from the iOS software was not active. We were connecting to our switches remotely and locally through the local credentials, not through a AAA accreditation. But that's a required piece because as we onboard these switches, you'll see the checklist go through as Meraki will now inject code into these switches as it links them from the dashboard into your environment. And it will use this AAA mechanism to provide the credentials of Meraki dashboard into this switch to allow the communication back and forth. So this must be turned on ahead of that conversation. One food for thought, while this string here is added when you do the Meraki implementation, if you're just setting your switches up ahead of time, let's say I got a batch of switches, I'm going to do the Meraki integration, but I just want to set it up first and then do the Meraki integration maybe a day later because I got a lot of updates to do. I got to put the code in there and then I'll do the onboarding afterwards. If you don't add this step of locally authenticating or tying it actually to a AAA server, you'll not have remote access to authenticate into your switch. I actually ran into this problem myself. I was like, oh, I can log in, no problem. My SSH was working fine, but because I'm introducing AAA's new model enabled in my switch, I have to make sure I can locally authenticate as well from a remote SSH connection. So I like to make the step myself by putting this string in as I go across my deployment if I know I'm staging it and not running the Meraki onboarder up front or doing at the same time I'm doing these updates to these switches. So a couple things we have to make sure we're doing as well is, do you have an NTP server set up? You know, we do. Do we have a name server set up? And we do. And then the other one to make sure is show run. Do we have show IP route? Do we have IP routes, IP routing enabled? That's a requirement. And make sure there is no default gateway set up. It has to be a default route set up to make sure your device is reachable. So the switch, just review the configuration. Most things and most designs are going to have a lot of these setups already there with your name servers, NTP servers, and your routing credentials. The AAA one might be something you see your devices not have automatically enabled, and it's just a requirement you have to go through to get these switches onboarded. And that's all done here in this blue text, but I figure it's healthier to show you in the command line. All right, so let's say we've got our switch primed and ready, which we do. We're happy with that. We've downloaded our application. We did show that. Let's open the application. What it's going to do is install this file. It's an exe file, so you might have to allow Windows to recognize this. A security prompt might come up and say, hey, it's an exe file. Do you want to allow it to open? You can say yes, trust Meraki, it's not malicious. It will check for versioning. If you do download this software and come back to it in a month, it will do an update check automatically. When I was doing this, and I had this run a couple months ago, I tried doing the local updater. That was when you unbox the application again, but it kind of got stuck. So I actually had to re-download it, small package file, just reinstall it. It's very minimally invasive as you go through that. However, as you notice, I downloaded it. It didn't actually give me any other installer details, like where did it actually put this application if I want to run it again and not have to keep downloading it. So I already have this loaded. It's under your users account, app data, local programs. You can just search for, essentially just search in Windows for Catalyst or Catalyst onboarding, and you'll find it here. And you can make your own shortcut if you want to here, and then place it on your desktop if you need to find this for future reference. Or you can ignore that step and just download it every time you want to do a Catalyst onboarding. The choice is yours. All right, so we've primed our switches, we've updated the version of software on our switches, we've downloaded the application, and now we're met with the first step of this onboarding process. Needs a Meraki dashboard API key. Click the little icon here. If you don't know where to get that, it tells you in good steps, how do I find my API key? Well, this is a video montage. We'll do that on our behalf. So to find APIs and API functionality, you want to go back to your Meraki dashboard, find your person icon, and go to your profile. I'm actually in my secondary account because my primary account already had the API keys already created, so I want to do a new one here, so I have my second account loaded here for this reason. Reason being is because I don't have any API keys created for my secondary account. And the most you can do is 2 API keys per profile, and all we need for this instance is just 1. So I'm going to generate a new API key. There's my key. I will remove this key after this video, so this key, if you screen grab it, will be of no use to you. I will copy that for my notepad. I'll put it over my notepad over here, just in case, and make sure that you have done what it says in big red text. Copy your API key. You've stored your API key. Save it to a personal notepad or a OneNote or wherever you want to keep your safe stuff, because if you do lose this, you'll have to either revoke it and create a new one. You won't not be able to get this API key full string again once you have created it. So once we hit done, I've saved my key, we've generated the key, and now it will show us the last 4 digits of that key to make sure we're pulling the right one for our instances, and it's never been used because, well, it's brand new. We'll go back to the cloud monitoring, and we will put our API key in the string here. It does hide it for us for security purposes. And you want to make sure that your devices are, one, your Meraki dashboard is reachable from your environment, and Meraki can pull this information out. There are some more steps inside of the guidelines that we're just going to go through and assume you already have local SSH to your switches, you have accessibility to Meraki dashboard. Not a lot of things that have to happen, but there are some other requirements to make sure your firewall can let some of these things through just in case. Now, what Meraki is going to do is with that API key, it's going to link your environment into this application, and it's going to have, my house, my personal account, Ingram Micro's Business Transformation Center, which is what we do want to use, or Ingram Micro Voyage platform, which is another organization we have in our dashboard. And we can see that from our global view or MSP view as well. We have the 3 dashboards here as well. So you can see exactly that it's pulling from the Meraki dashboard into this application. The API has connected our environments together, and we are ready to move along. For our purposes, we're just going to collect the radio button of the Ingram Micro Business Transformation Center. I'm going to link that dashboard. It'll tell us how to do that. We can log in again if we need to, and we'll just hit next. So we've found our organization, we've API connected, and now you can see that on the left-hand side, there's these steps as we go across. We've selected our organization. I think yes. Now, enter device information to onboard. Enter the IP addresses you want to bring into this environment. So for our purposes, I have a few switches. I actually have this switch, which happens to be a 9500 series, 10 gig switch, a 9300 standalone switch, and a, stack of 9300s. So I've onboarded a couple 9200s. This will be my first time bringing in a stack or a 9500 during this demo. So everything should go well because it's supported, but we will find out. Once I have the IP addresses loaded, we'll go next. Now we have to make sure these device credentials are going to be what typically you want is a common set of credentials across all your devices so you can pull it once into your environment. And we're going to do that here with our environment. Okay, so if everything was typed properly, we know that these credentials, username and password, are on all of my switches. So I know this is a common credential string. I will make sure that my device will have this, and now I will hit next to make sure that I have satisfied the device credential requirement. Nice thing is here, now we get another step in the process to make sure that we've done our diligence, right? Our onboarding checklist. Did we do everything we said we had to do that we covered earlier in a command line string, right? The AAA, the NTP, the IP routing, no default gateways, name server across the board. And it will help us make sure that we're good because we're going to start a pre-check. I will click on that, and it'll make sure the device is a supported model and everything else we want to go across the board. Oh, we have an error. That's okay. Now we'll see retry. 208, that is a stack. Curious on that one. Error occurred. Interesting. All right, so now we got some errors. We'll see why. Device not eligible on routing. IP routing must be enabled. Oh, well, let's come back to that. And that's okay. Not everything goes according to plan. We'll do the 2 we like. I'll take a step back here. I'll take back here. I'll take this guy out of the mix for now. Try it again. Start our pre-check one more time. All right, these 2 are good. All right, so we will go over here and hit next. Everything looks good. So what it's going to do is now look at, now that we've discovered these switches, we found them in our environment, we want to add them to a specific network that we want to have visible across our organization. And our organization does have many networks we want to tie them to. We'll go to this one for BTC, BTC for both, and we're going to add them to these respective networks within our one org, and you can move them anywhere you want depending on how you want to see them. And we want to show one giant topology tree, right? So we want to go in here and make sure our topology looks right, and we're going to see all these catalyst switches now start populating their connections across our environment. And as we do that, I'm going to go back here to our organization, take a look at where we have right now. So go into our Business Transformation Center network. We'll beyond the BTC network, and I'll go into topology real quick. This is one of the value adds you get with putting the monitoring mode inside of the dashboard is you get to see removing the little diamonds that show the catalyst switches in your environment to put them into the fully monitored mode with an actual Meraki icon across the facility. So right now, here's our topology tree. As I add more of these devices in here, we're going to start seeing more of them resolve into this tree and broaden it to give us more of a full scope of my entire network, Catalyst and Meraki at one time. All right, so we're going to confirm these changes. And we can see the details. Now we can go through. If I have questions about what exactly is Meraki going to be putting into my switches, because they're going to inject some code, we can go through line by line by line to see what Meraki is actually going to be doing to set up the tunnels, set up the user interface, set up the Meraki cloud to interface with my devices across the board. So it does a nice job of making sure that we're comfortable with what Meraki is going to put into our switches, but because this is monitoring mode, we're not going to have any issues maintaining and managing our switches that we've done before, right? We're not removing command line access. We're not removing any ways or anything out of your switch. We're just adding the Meraki features into it for monitor only purposes. Now, if for some reason you were to remove the devices or want them out of the Meraki monitoring component, pulling those code strings will be a manual process off the switch. But we can talk about that if we ever want to go that direction. But hopefully we want to keep monitoring mode active across our catalysts. So we're comfortable with what's going to be injected. Let's go to next. And are we comfortable with that? We're going to say yes. And let's go back up our configs. We'll have them do those code injections, import everything you want to do, and it will now start bringing it into the dashboard. And this is all essentially automated, right? We just added a few credential steps, added a few pieces of information, and let Meraki's application do its thing. And then once this is completed, we'll go back to our topology tree. That's the easiest way to see what's going on in a visual view. We'll go back to our switch list and see how the monitoring devices will now start resolving in this environment. And we'll give this a minute as it onboards. And then you see the last step in our journey here is just the finish button after that. So we'll give it a second. And as we do this, it's not taking the device offline. There's no reboot required. There's no downtime for the device. So there's no impact to your network as you go across doing this type of change design. So which is very comfortable to know that as you're doing this, there's not going to have any ramifications or issues with an operative environment or any user impact as you go across this environment, which is helpful. All right, says device is connected successfully. We'll hit view in a second, and then we'll go to this one. Let's see if this guy comes up. And you can expand the caret here to see what's going on in its connection, right? We're gonna make sure it's doing its thing. And this one will give you an output of what's going on here as well. So it's just taking a second for it to be available, and now it's connected successfully. So again, a little bit of automation behind the scenes, under the covers going on with that process. If we hit view, it'll take us back to our Meraki dashboard, but we've already logged in prior, so we're just gonna hit next. And we're going to see if we want to add more devices. My experience was great. Submit, sure. We'll fill that out later. So we can add more devices, which is fine. If you like this process, you can go back and do the rest of your portfolio, or you can just close the application and then you just load it again from that shortcut, or reinstall if you lost where that shortcut went. So for our purposes, I'll just shrink this down. I'll go back to our network-wide topology. I'll zoom out here a little bit. I'll refresh my topology, and we'll see if we now have more devices springing up into our dashboard. There we go. 9,500 was not there before, and now it is. Management net, 9,300. Telemetry is being received from the device, right? So it's getting there. It takes a little while, right? So just if you don't see the switch automatically or quickly, or you see some yellow indicators on it, it does take some time for the switches to start funneling all their details into the dashboard. And I think give it a 15, maybe 30 minutes at most for everything to kind of smooth out and be designed properly when you go into the environment from there. I'm not sure why all these are hidden. Open these back up. Boop, 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 boop. There we go. All right, so let's now move away from topology, but having another string or path off of our design now that was once an unknown entity in our environment to Meraki's view, or my live topology view, now becomes an entity that is important to me. And as it finds other switches behind those switches, Cisco Discovery Protocol, it's going to now bring my topology into an even broader view that says, oh, great, I onboarded this switch. It's monitored. Oh, it found another switch that's not monitored. And how do I go about adding that to my environment as well? And now you can see why just staging it for a few switches like we did for 2 would be impactful if you did it for all 20 in our environment, right? I'll let it refresh one more time here. And there he goes. All right, so the management net now was once yellow, now it's green, and we're seeing nothing come off of it just yet, but it did inject another switch link between it and our Meraki firewall connection. So now what was once also a hidden link in my Meraki environment now is exposed as well. So it's, again, helpful to see this start becoming fully realized as we go beyond just a Meraki centric world. So for now, this will prove it that I go to my switches view, and now I will start seeing more than just Meraki into this view, because now we start seeing these monitor only sections into our dashboard. We've done some 9200Ls prior. We've just added the 9300, or no, sorry, 9500 and the 9300, and they've retained their host names, right? So everything we had in our host name prior is just brought into this dashboard view. And you can see it doesn't have a lot of connections and information being brought in yet, because it's going to take some time for that telemetry to be brought out. So I'm going to go back to one that we had built in prior, one that's been online for a little bit, that's been Meraki monitored, connected. We're going to go back and take a look at it. So this one is a 9200 series, supported by this design. And now we can see how it looks like a Meraki switch. We can see the port interfaces. We can see what's not connected. We can see what is connected with the green indicators. We can see what's connected at a different speed with dark green versus light green. We get the indicator of uplink. So now, I can see this Catalyst switch, which is a 24 port switch, stacking capable, 4 uplink ports available, is in my environment. I can see some clients hanging off that. But what I don't get is client usage. Telemetry. Well, the reason for that is because, as it says in our little notice here, monitor-only switches with DNA Essential licensing, which this one does have, usage and application information is only available when DNA Advantage is provided. So while I can, yes, have a DNA Essential deployment, which is the lower cost license from the Cisco switch, into my Meraki deployment and look at it like this, I don't get any additional application telemetry usage, because like even in DNA Center, the DNA Advantage subscription license, which is more expensive, does more things, and that still will apply here into the Meraki world as well. So just be aware of that, of what an Essentials license would look like when connected and booted into our environment with a 9200 or 300 or 500. It doesn't matter which platform, just the Essential license will give you this output when you're monitoring this in the environment. Now I can click on an interface. We'll click on one that's live here. And we can see some port traffic data. We can see that it's enabled, it's VLAN status. It's any information that we get typically from a Meraki switched hardware Meraki switch will give you the same level of information, its status, and even the ability to power cycle that port. So even though it's not a managed switch, it's monitor only, I can do one thing and actually shut or no shut or recycle that port in case I had like a misbehaving access point or anything powered by PoE or a phone or something off that port. I can reboot that device remotely by just power cycling it by disabling that port and turning it back on with this one button. Otherwise, you have no other configuration editing rights, right? There's no pencil. I can't change anything. I can't even change the host name, right? It is just a monitor-only switch. I can do some ping tests. I can do the port cycle. I can do a MAC forwarding table lookup. But again, this is a not managed device, so I can just monitor it and get it really my topology tree to see what's going on and get some information from. Now, I'm going to go back to my 9500 and see. Let's go to my management net one. This is the new one we onboarded here. Let's see what happens. Because what this one should have is no error, or no alert. Right? It's not an error, it's just an alert, because this switch is running DNA advantaged licensing. So this one will have, once the information starts populating, once it's soaked into my environment, it will now start providing application details, client usage telemetry, connectivity data for the switch itself. So I'm going to get some more realized information out of this switch because it has DNA advantaged licensing inside of it. And I wanted to show you that difference between essentials and advantage coming into this design. Now, as that's loaded, we can give it an address so we know it's part of our mapping profile. We can definitely add it back to our network-wide maps and floor plans. We can put these Catalyst switches on there for physical viewability. That's helpful. We can also tag these devices, right? So it's recently added, I get that, but it's also a Catalyst switch. I'm going to tag it with Catalyst. And now I know that I can search in my switch section for any Catalyst tag and know I'm going to have a monitor-only device at this current time. I can see a note, we can see was added on, what's today, 9/21/22, so it's live here. We'll save that so we know when it was monitored in my topology. And it even tells us the software version because it is a Catalyst switch. It is running iOS XE, tells you with 17.6.3. We'll pull that information in and we can see that it's connected, its IP address and its default gateway because we configured IP routing on that device. Again, I can click on a port. I have no editing capabilities. I can do the same thing I could with an essential license. It's just a monitoring only tool, but now I can visually see my ports, what are on, what are off, what's uplinked, what's not uplinked. This happens to be a 40 gig uplink coming into my environment as well. So that's it. That is the steps to go and bring a Catalyst switch into a Meraki environment.